Yes, thank you very much, Steve, for already indicating some of my topics. So you have heard already that the Beta Israel are one of the very few Jewish groups that had a monastic movement, and I want to give you a little bit more insights into this by tracing the Beta Israel monastic tradition through their manuscripts. I want to walk you through the overall manuscript tradition of the Beta Israel, but a special focus shall be paid back, please. One slide, thanks. To this manuscript. It is manuscript Oriental 87 from the National Library in Israel. It's a very impressive large codex with over 10 kilograms of weight. If we want to talk about the monastic tradition, we have to mention Abba Sabra, as already Steve did. So there's lots of legends about him and his origin. Some say that he was a Christian who became a Beta Israel. Others say that he was born as a Beta Israel. All legends, however, agree that he at some time lived at the court of the very staunch Christian Emperor Zara Yaakov. And then one of the emperor's sons, Tzaga Amlak, became his student. After some time, Abba Sabra converted Tzaga Amlak, so he also became a Beta Israel, and this made Zara Yaakov furious, and he threatened to have them executed. So the two of them fled and escaped through the wilderness until they reached a place called Hohau. Here, Abba Sabra founded the first monastery of the group. He laid down their purity rites, and he's said to have written several texts. Hohau is thus the most important monastery of the group, but it is still surrounded by lots of mysteries, as very little about it is known, and we only have one description of the site. This comes from the Jewish traveler Jacques Feitlovich, who visited Hohau in the early 20th century, and he wrote this. The Hohau Mountains, whose high-reaching peaks offer the view over the entire provinces of Abyssinia all the way to the Sudan, are a landscape of high attraction. Here is the site of the most holy and most cherished memories of the Beta Israel, and legends connected to its peaks and steep declines abound. The temple itself is today the most beautiful prayer house of the Beta Israel. So let us also look at the general phenomenon of monasticism among this group. So in absence of a strong political leadership, it was the monks who acted as leader of the communities. When in the mid-19th century, Protestant missionaries arrived in Ethiopia, the monks were the strongest defenders against this missionary threat. They were also in charge of consecrating new monks and priests and prayer houses. They were composing religious texts, and they were teaching the community in religious matters. In general, monasteries were known as centers of learning and manuscript production. Despite all this, the Beta Israel are commonly described as a group without a historiographical tradition. Back, please. This is on the one hand very unfair to the strong and vivid oral history of the group, but on the other hand, this is probably based on the fact that until last year, only one historiographical text predating the 20th century was known. It was published by Wolf Leslau in the 1940s as a religious dispute, and you see here both his article and also the paper manuscript that this text is found upon. The overall manuscript tradition of the Beta Israel is able, however, to add much more information on the history of this group, as the manuscript that I will discuss now can prove. So until recently, the manuscript tradition remained unstudied, which is why I will lay down some of its most striking elements. In general, the tradition developed in close connection to the Christian tradition, but with unique and defining features. I divide the manuscripts into three categories, which can be done on the basis of size and content, which are both followed rather conservatively. So you see here the large manuscripts, which can reach dimensions of up to 30 centimeters in width and 40 centimeters in height. They contain exclusively the Octatuch, that is Orit in Ge'ez, the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. They are often covered in ornamented leather covers, and they were exclusively written by Christian scribes. That is a very important fact. Then the medium-sized manuscripts, where you can see that their dimensions are slightly smaller, contain exclusively the wisdom literature, prophetic and deuterocanonical Old Testament books. They are sometimes covered in leather covers, and also those texts were written by Christian scribes. So if we come to the small sized manuscripts, and you can see that they can be really small, and those are probably the most important ones considering Beta Israel traditions. First of all, they were all written by Beta Israel scribes, and they contained the prayers and the liturgical text of this group. I almost never encountered leather covers, and all the manuscripts I examined were of rather recent age. And they include, however, and this is very important, mixed languages. So the biblical texts that are featured in the other group of manuscripts are, of course, all written in Ge'ez, the ancient Semitic language of the Ethiopian highlands. But here in the small prayer texts, there is also Agau, which is a Cushitic language that was at some point spoken by parts of the Beta Israel. And also we find lots of modern language notes. For example, here on the lower left side, lower right, sorry, you see a note in Amharic written by the scribe complaining to be paid already. If we consider the fact that large and medium-sized manuscripts are written by Christian scribes, they of course needed adaptation and change to suit the new Beta Israel owner. Small manuscripts were written by Beta Israel scribes and obviously did not need any adaptations. So I will show you some of the features we encounter. The first example you see here already at the bottom of the screen. The doxology of the Beta Israel is added in light brown ink above the text. And here's another example. The doxology of the Beta Israel reads, "Praised be the Lord, the God of Israel, the God of all spirit and of all flesh." And we find it very often written above the Christian introductory lines. One of the most striking changes we encounter is this. So please back. So as I said, they were covered in leather covers, especially the large sized manuscript. And these covers were always ornamented in a traditional fashion, at the center of which we would usually find a cross. And I have found several examples where this cross was either cut out or scratched off. And the one where it is scratched off here, we will discuss a bit more. And I found also a third manuscript where the cross was covered by some wax. Also, obviously, when Christians were writing the text, the manuscript could contain text that had Christian words in them, and those had to be erased when the ownership shifted. So here you see also the word Christos can partly still be legible, but it has been erased. Coming back to our manuscript under study, and we see it here with its last owner, Abba Yitzhak, who made Aliyah in 1982. You see him on the right after he came to Israel, and on the second image we see him preaching from this very manuscript. This manuscript was actually one of the few possessions that he was able to bring on his dangerous trek from Ethiopia to Israel. And when he died, his family donated it to the National Library. Abba Yitzhak stands in direct connection with the most important text that this manuscript contains, and that is the Hohau genealogy. So the value of this genealogy is manifold. For one, it is only the second historiographical note predating the 20th century that was discovered so far, the other being Les Laud's Religious Dispute. But for a closer look on Hohau itself, this genealogy offers also a lot of information. It contains the spiritual and biological genealogy of Abba Werke, the head of Hohau, and also the spiritual and biological genealogy of Abba Iob, his disciple, and also a third disciple is named. If you look at the center column at the bottom, there is in blue ink another name, and that is Iyasu. And this was the father of Abba Yitzhak Iyasu, the last owner of the manuscript that I just showed you. The strictly genealogical passages are written in formulaic Ge'ez, while the rest is in Amharic. And the text relates to the mourning tradition, the Tezkah of Abba Werke when he passed away. So his disciples slaughtered several bulls in his honor, and he donated expensive textiles called gemja, and he celebrated the Tezkah in Hohau and in another unnamed monastery in Welkite, which unfortunately is currently a war zone. Thus, we have information about a monastic network between Hohau and Wapkite. The Hohau genealogy is the first local source identifying the location of Hohau in the Janfankara region north of Gondar, and it states that it was written during the reign of Emperor Johannes IV. It contains words in the regional dialect of Gondar and the nearby region Wagara, so telling us where the protagonist came from. And in the personal names that are contained in the text, we learn about the naming tradition of the Beta Israel, which used both Amharic and Agau names. The entire manuscript Oriental 87 contains further important features that attest to the high learning of Abba Werke. It contains the text Negare Muse, which is only known in very few other manuscripts, and it also has several important scribal features, for example, a note written in secret script. However, the Hohau genealogy stands out in this manuscript as it is an important historiographical source on the Beta Israel monasticism, and on its most important because first monastery. Before discovering the text, our knowledge about Hohau relied on European travel accounts and the oral tradition recorded by the group, and the Hohau genealogy now is the first time that the monks speak to us directly. And with an image of me in front of this wonderful manuscript, I want to say thank you for your attention.